Samantha Jones moved down the dimly lit corridor of the Hotel Lakeside with quiet determination, a bucket of cleaning supplies in one hand and a spray bottle in the other. At 34, she was accustomed to blending into the background. Her uniform, a drab grey dress, concealed the delicate contours of her frame, while her long, dark hair was carefully pinned into a low bun that rarely saw the light of day. Only her eyes, warm amber that caught flecks of light in the hallway, hinted at the resilience beneath her soft-spoken demeanor. Most of the hotel's guests never noticed Samantha as they passed, luggage in tow, focused on their own agendas. She'd learned to take pride in her work, drawing satisfaction from the small victories of making a mirror sparkle or leaving a bathroom spotless. It was far from the life she'd once imagined, but it was steady, and for the moment, that was enough. 3 years earlier, she had navigated the heartbreak of her divorce from Michael Reynolds, a man who once promised her a stable life, only to leave her for his younger secretary. She remembered the day he confessed, shamefaced but oddly triumphant, that he felt unfulfilled. Samantha had stared at him, tears in her amber eyes, until the finality of it sank in. In the months that followed, she sold what little they had of value, found a small apartment in Pilsen, and painstakingly rebuilt her existence. That apartment, though modest, now housed not only Samantha, but her father, Robert Jones. At 68, he was a former professor of English literature, once admired by generations of students at a local community college. Now, he battled advanced heart failure, relying on costly medications that strained the family's finances. Each day, Samantha rose early, ensured he took his pills, prepared a quick breakfast, then rode 2 buses to reach the hotel. No matter how exhausted she felt, she was determined to keep the roof over their heads and her father's health stable. When she finally finished her shift this evening, Samantha left the threadbare halls of the lakeside, stepping out into a crisp Chicago wind off Lake Michigan. Her backpack slung over her shoulder, she hurried to catch the bus heading toward Pilsen. The city lights glimmered on the water, reflecting a life that felt just out of reach. She exhaled a weary sigh and tried not to think about the mounting bills. Inside her apartment building, a worn structure that stood in stark contrast to the upscale high-rises nearer downtown, she was greeted by Elena Rodriguez, a warm-hearted, 52-year-old retired nurse who lived across the hallway. Elena offered a plate of tamales with a sympathetic smile, telling Samantha she had checked on Robert that afternoon. "Your dad's resting," Elena said, in a hushed tone. "He seemed okay, but that cough is worse." Samantha thanked her neighbor and stepped inside to find her father sitting at the small kitchen table, hunched over a stack of unopened mail. His once vibrant hazel eyes appeared clouded with fatigue. He tried to stand, wanting to greet his daughter properly, but she waved him down, crossing the room to place a gentle hand on his shoulder. They exchanged few words. Their bond was deeper than small talk. She noticed a new hospital bill with bright red lettering, but chose not to open it right away. She would handle that, just like she handled everything else, in the silence of the night. Before long, Robert retired to his bedroom, coughing softly into his sleeve. Samantha ate one of Elena's tamales in the dim kitchen light, then brushed her teeth quickly. The living room also served as a makeshift space for everything else: piles of laundry, an ancient TV, a sagging couch, but it was home. By the time she slipped into bed, she could feel her limbs aching from hours of physical labor, her mind racing through the never-ending list of obligations she had to meet. She glanced at a small photograph on her nightstand, her mother, Catherine, smiling gently, forever frozen in a moment of contentment. Samantha closed her eyes, wishing for that same sense of peace. For now, She could only find fleeting solace in sleep, lulled by the faint city sounds outside her window, wondering if tomorrow would bring any glimpse of a life beyond the invisible role she played each day. Morning at the Hotel Lakeside arrived with a flurry of activity that often belied its three-star status. Set near Lake Michigan, the old structure carried a certain vintage charm, ornate moldings, heavy drapes in the lobby, and creaky wooden floors that visitors claimed gave the place character. But beneath that allure lay aging pipes, faulty wiring, and an ever-dwindling budget for repairs. Samantha hurried in through the service entrance, tying her apron firmly around her waist as she prepared to tackle another shift. Miranda Phillips, the ambitious 45-year-old manager of guest services, roamed the corridors with the hurried strides of someone too busy to care about niceties. She spotted Samantha near the employee lockers. "You'll handle the 10th floor checkouts today," she directed. "We're at max capacity for the conference, so don't lag, and don't forget we have VIPs staying on 4. Her tone was clipped, eyes sharp with unspoken disapproval. Samantha offered a polite nod, resigned to Miranda's demands. News traveled fast among the hotel staff, and Samantha soon heard anxious murmurs. Talk of an impending sale of the lakeside to a major corporation. No one seemed certain, but the rumor alone stirred collective unease. Housekeepers worried about losing their jobs, bellhops fretted about possible pay cuts, and front desk clerks nervously awaited official announcements. While vacuuming outside the conference room, Samantha overheard a snippet of conversation between two staff supervisors. "I heard Bennett Technologies is trying to buy up everything around here," one whispered, "including some neighborhoods in Pilsen." Samantha's heart skipped. Pilsen was her neighborhood. What if that purchase meant higher rents or demolitions? She'd already seen families displaced as real estate prices climbed. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket, and she seized a quick moment in a staff hallway to answer. "Miss Jones?" came the familiar voice of Dr. Williams, her father's physician. "I'm concerned about the latest test results. Robert needs a stronger medication regimen, and unfortunately, the insurance might not cover it. I'm sorry." Samantha fought the urge to cry, swallowing hard and thanking him for the update, another expense she couldn't afford. After hanging up, she pressed a hand to her temple. Stress coiled tight in her chest, but she forced herself to breathe and refocus. There was no time for panic. She needed her job more than ever. Later, as she wiped down the polished wooden front desk, a new guest approached, a tall man around 40, with striking blue eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore a simple grey sweater and dark jeans. "James Bennett," he introduced himself quietly, sliding a small suitcase closer. "I'm checking in." Lisa Chen, the 29-year-old receptionist who was also Samantha's friend, handled the registration. Though he didn't announce himself as anyone special, the name Bennett instantly drew Samantha's attention. He offered a polite smile in her direction, acknowledging her presence in a way few guests did. She returned a restrained nod, not wanting to seem intrusive. Moments later, as Samantha walked away, she couldn't help replaying the rumors about Bennett Technologies in her mind. Could there be a link, or was Bennett just a coincidence? Her train of thought was interrupted by another commotion. A couple from Ohio demanding to change rooms, displeased with a rattling air conditioner. Samantha discreetly helped gather their luggage and guided them to a different suite, all under the watchful eye of Miranda. When the commotion settled, Samantha's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Elena with concerns about her father's persistent fatigue. A wave of guilt washed over Samantha for not being there herself. She consoled Elena, promising she'd be home soon with a fresh supply of groceries. Back on the first floor, she caught another hushed conversation. "They say Bennett Tech wants to demolish this entire block to build a high-end complex," a bellhop whispered to a maid. The statement was punctuated by a sigh and a shake of the head. Samantha gathered her cleaning supplies, worry etched on her face. She tried to dismiss it as mere gossip, but a nagging voice in the back of her mind wouldn't let go. For the sake of her father's fragile stability, she hoped these whispers were only rumors. Little did she know how closely her life was about to intertwine with the man who had just checked in under the name James Bennett. A cold sweat covered Samantha's brow as she jolted upright in bed. The memory of fire haunted her sleep. Flickering flames, acrid smoke, a suffocating darkness. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, trying to slow her heartbeat. The clock on her nightstand read 5:23 a.m. Outside, streetlights still lit the quiet roads of Pilsen. In the next room, her father was coughing softly, reminding her that rest would be fleeting. She sighed, got up, and put on her faded robe. By the time Samantha reached the kitchen, Robert was already awake. His once athletic frame seemed diminished. "You're up early again," he said, voice hoarse. "Bad dreams?" She nodded, forcing a smile. He tapped the table where a wrinkled envelope lay. "Landlord gave me this," he explained quietly. Samantha picked it up, her eyes scanning the threat of eviction if the property was sold. It made her stomach twist. She prepared his morning medication and insisted he drink an herbal tea. Despite his frailty, Robert tried to reassure her with a gentle pat on her hand. "We'll figure it out," he said, though his eyes betrayed deep concern. At the hotel, Samantha was greeted by the flickering of overhead lights in the fourth-floor corridor. The building's wiring had been increasingly troublesome, and Thomas Wu, the 61-year-old head of maintenance, looked worried. "I've been telling management for months," he muttered, fiddling with an exposed outlet cover. "This entire floor needs rewiring. One spark in the wrong place and we'll have big problems." Samantha nodded sympathetically. "Miranda says they're waiting on budget approvals," she offered, though she didn't truly believe it herself. The last time Miranda had discussed budgets, it had been about cost-cutting, not repairs. Later that morning, as she rolled her cleaning cart past room 412, she paused. She could hear the faint clatter of a keyboard inside. James Bennett was staying there, and from the glimpses she'd caught, he seemed more preoccupied than the typical tourist. She pictured him carrying a stack of notebooks earlier. Some were labeled with corporate-looking logos she didn't have time to read. Wasn't he supposed to be a writer seeking inspiration? She shrugged off the curiosity and moved on to the next room on her list. However, when she entered the service elevator, she overheard a snippet of conversation from two men in suits discussing Bennett Tech expansions. A sudden wave of dread washed over her. Could James be affiliated with the same company rumored to be eyeing Pilsen? Before she had time to dwell on it, her phone buzzed. Elena's caller ID flashed across the screen. She answered in a low voice. "Samantha, I just got word from one of the neighbors," Elena said, tension lacing her tone. "They're receiving offers to sell. The letters mention a corporate buyout of the entire block. People are scared." A swirl of conflicting emotions took hold. Even if she wanted to help, Samantha felt powerless, scraping by on her meager salary while caring for her father's mounting medical needs. She swallowed her frustration and thanked Elena, promising to update her if she learned anything more. After hanging up, she slumped against the elevator wall, closing her eyes for a moment of stolen reprieve. As the day wore on, the flickering lights in the hall grew worse. Each time she walked past, Samantha's pulse quickened. She couldn't help but recall her nightmare, the sense of choking on smoke. Over lunch in the hotel break room, she voiced her worries to Lisa Chen, the friendly receptionist who was juggling a child at home and bills of her own. "That old wiring scares me too," Lisa agreed. "Miranda says they'll fix it, but you know how it goes. If this place gets bought, the new owners might tear it down anyway." Their conversation was cut short when the overhead light flickered ominously, sending a collective shiver through the handful of employees gathered there. Samantha tried to laugh it off, but the tension in the room was palpable. She couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play, like a series of omens hinting at trouble just around the corner. Samantha carefully pushed open the door to James Bennett's room, a standard procedure as part of her housekeeping rounds. She paused at the threshold, taking in the unmade bed, a clutter of papers, and the faint scent of black coffee lingering in the air. With practiced efficiency, she gathered the used towels and dropped them into her cart before turning her attention to the scattered documents. They appeared to be charts and notes regarding something called Project Lakeside. She paused. The words made her uneasy, reminding her of rumors about extensive urban redevelopment. A fleeting memory of childhood washed over her. Robert, younger and vibrant, explaining how individuals in service roles, like janitors, cafeteria workers, maintenance staff, were often overlooked but essential to keeping institutions running smoothly. He had taught her to see value in every contribution, no matter how invisible it might seem. She remembered the pride in his voice when he insisted that a person's worth wasn't about titles, but about the respect they showed others. At the foot of James's desk lay a folder emblazoned with a recognizable logo, Bennett Technologies. Samantha's pulse quickened. She knew better than to snoop, but the puzzle pieces were aligning uncomfortably. Could James be connected to the same corporation rumored to be buying up properties in Pilsen? She set the folder aside carefully, tidied the room, and left without a word. In the hallway, she encountered Lisa Chen. The young receptionist was wrangling a half-dozen frantic phone calls at once, but she paused to share a sympathetic smile. "We're all hearing the same rumors," Lisa said softly, "about Bennett Tech. The staff is on edge." Samantha nodded, her thoughts swirling. Steeling herself, she returned to the small staff lounge to check her phone. There was a missed call from her father, and she felt a stab of guilt for not answering. She dialed him back immediately. Robert sounded weary, his voice thinner than usual. "The landlord's notice came again," he murmured. 3 months, Sam. That's all we have." Her hand gripped the phone tightly as she promised to find a solution. She ended the call and sank into a vinyl chair, flipping through her wallet. A handful of faded receipts and spare change stared back at her, far from enough to relocate or even cover extra medical bills. She exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her forehead. Before her shift ended, she ran into Thomas Wu, who was fiddling with a breaker box in a corner of the basement. He shook his head, complaining quietly about outdated wiring. "I've told them it's a fire hazard," he repeated, "but we keep putting band-aids on bullet wounds." Samantha thanked him for his vigilance and made her way to the cafe inside the hotel lobby. There, behind a row of potted plants, she noticed James Bennett sipping coffee and scanning his tablet with an air of refined focus. Despite her suspicions, she couldn't deny an air of kindness in the way he treated the staff, acknowledging greetings, smiling politely, never barking orders as so many well-to-do guests did. She lingered a moment, curious yet wary, watching him type something on his tablet with swift, methodical movements. When the phone in her apron pocket buzzed again, it startled her. Robert's shaky voice came through. "They say I have to give an answer soon, Sam. I can't lose this place. It's near the hospital, and Elena, I feel trapped." Her heart clenched at his desperation. "I'll figure it out, Dad," she promised. But after the call ended, she slumped against the wall, feeling the weight of her father's fragility. That evening, with the last corridor swept and the last trash bag disposed of, she sat in the staff room reviewing her finances. The numbers refused to cooperate. For a moment, she entertained an impossible hope. Maybe if the rumored takeover didn't happen, or if by some miracle the new owners offered fair relocation assistance, things could improve. But such thoughts felt like a distant fantasy. With rent due and her father's medication costs piling up, Samantha wondered just how invisible she would have to remain to keep their lives afloat. In the hush of early morning, Samantha rolled a bucket and mop across the deserted lobby of the Hotel Lakeside. Overtime had become her only option if she hoped to keep ahead of the mounting bills. She'd volunteered for the late shift, a trade-off between rest and the precious dollars that might secure her father's medication for another month. The echo of her footsteps reminded her how the hotel's grandeur faded after midnight. Plush armchairs and polished floors seemed lonely under the dimmed lights. Halfway through wringing out the mop, she spotted James Bennett strolling in from the street, shoulders slightly hunched against the chill of the lakefront wind. He paused at the glass doors, as if surprised to see her there, then offered a faint smile. An odd sense of closeness tugged at her, an unspoken camaraderie in the silence of the near-empty lobby. "Burning the midnight oil?" he asked quietly, stepping over to remove his gloves. She noticed fresh exhaustion around his eyes, as though he'd been working non-stop. In his arm, he carried a stack of folders and notebooks. "Yeah," she replied, forcing a polite grin. "I need the hours." The overhead lights flickered again, a mild flicker that made them both glance upward. James set his paperwork down on a coffee table. "I came in late tonight. Too many meetings," he explained. "I'm trying to finish a book about people who do extraordinary things in ordinary jobs." He flashed a slightly self-conscious look, as though uncertain of her reaction. Samantha tilted her head, intrigued. "That sounds interesting." She wanted to ask more. His knowledge of business seemed far too advanced for a simple writer, and she couldn't shake the suspicion that he was more than he claimed. But politeness held her tongue. Thomas Wu approached from behind, wearing a worried frown. "We had another outage on the 4th floor. I'm doing what I can, but I'm no electrician." He cast a glance at James and Samantha, then cleared his throat. "I'll see if I can keep things stable for the night." Samantha resumed her cleaning tasks, while James lingered for a moment before heading upstairs. A deep sense of apprehension prickled at her. The flickering lights, the overworked electrical system, she couldn't ignore the mounting signs of potential trouble. By 3 in the morning, Samantha's shift was nearly over. She stored her supplies in a small closet near the staff break room, ready to clock out. She turned to find James standing in the lobby again, gazing through the picture windows at Lake Michigan's moonlit shimmer. The city lights played over his face, illuminating the tension in his jaw. She approached, drawn by curiosity. "You okay?" He hesitated before responding. "Sometimes," he said. "I think I've lost sight of what really matters in life. Seeing people like you, how hard you work, how genuine you are, makes me think." His words took her off guard, stirring an odd blend of gratitude and caution in her chest. She didn't know what to say. Before she could form a response, a voice crackled through the hotel's radio system. Miranda's sharp tone came through. "Attention all staff, we've got a major event in town. Full capacity expected this weekend. No time for slack." James offered her a small smile of encouragement, then gathered his folders and walked to the elevator. Samantha watched him go, uncertain how to interpret his fleeting confession. She returned to the break room, intending to head home, but paused when a faint odor caught her attention. Smoke. She sniffed the air again, uncertain. The smell vanished quickly, replaced by the usual stale odor of cleaning chemicals. When she reported it to Miranda, the manager waved her off. "Imagining things," Miranda scoffed, distracted by a booking system glitch. "Focus on your tasks, Samantha." Tired and a little uneasy, Samantha concluded her shift and slipped out into the cold pre-dawn air. She couldn't forget James's earnest expression or the disquieting flicker of lights overhead. Though dawn's first light crept in, the city's looming shadows felt heavier than ever. She boarded the bus to Pilsen, the sense of something simmering beneath the surface, growing stronger with each passing minute. Samantha awoke to the shrill blare of the hotel's fire alarm, piercing the silence. For a moment, she thought it was part of a nightmare. Then the reality hit. The strobe lights in her tiny employee room flashed, and faint screams echoed through the basement corridor. Heart pounding, she swung her legs over the edge of the narrow cot and pushed her aching body to move. It was just after 3 in the morning. She opened the door to a swirl of commotion. Thick smoke seeped down from the upper floors, a choking haze that clung to the walls like a living thing. The ancient building's corridors were filled with guests rushing in robes and slippers, clutching valuables or helping companions along. Samantha felt her pulse pound in her ears as she tried to stay calm. Thomas Wu's voice crackled over the hotel's walkie-talkie system. "All floors evacuate immediately. 4th floor is fully involved in flames. We think everyone's out." "Hurry!" Samantha moved to help guide an elderly couple through the smoky hallway, urging them toward the side exit. She passed a trembling housekeeper who repeated something in halting English about someone still inside. The woman was inconsolable, tears streaming down her cheeks. It was then Samantha heard a panicked mention of 412. Recognizing the room number, a spark of alarm shot through her. Room 412 belonged to James Bennett. She remembered how he'd been working late, typing away at all hours. Had he managed to escape? Her heart twisted. She had no plan other than a fierce instinct that she had to do something. She grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall and sprinted for the stairwell, fighting against the current of frightened guests streaming down. Choking smoke burned her eyes, but she pressed on. Over her shoulder, she heard voices yelling for her to stop. A surge of adrenaline propelled her forward regardless. 2 flights up, the heat slapped her full in the face. Embers danced in the smoky gloom, and the harsh smell of burning carpet turned her stomach. At the 4th floor landing, the hallway was thick with grey-black smoke, walls stained with soot. Samantha crouched low, remembering lessons from a long-ago safety drill. She pressed a damp towel, snatched from her room in a desperate hurry, to her mouth and nose, trying not to inhale the toxic fumes. Flames licked at the far end of the corridor. She heard the crackle of fire as it consumed the outdated wallpaper and wooden doors. Wincing, she scanned door numbers 408, 410, finally 412. The metal doorknob felt hot against her palm, but she turned it anyway, locked. Without hesitating, she threw her weight against the door. It barely budged. Desperate, she grabbed a nearby housekeeping cart. Mustering strength she didn't know she had, she rammed it into the door until the wood splintered under the impact. Inside, the air was barely breathable. The drapes were on fire, casting a sinister glow over the room. Smoke obscured almost everything, but she glimpsed James's motionless form on the floor near the bed. He looked unconscious, pinned under a fallen section of the ceiling. Fear clutched Samantha's throat, but she pushed it aside and hurried over. "James!" she shouted, dropping to her knees. She tried tugging the debris off his leg. With a grunt, she managed to free him, then placed the fire extinguisher within reach and sprayed it haphazardly toward the flaming curtains. The noise and heat were overwhelming. Struggling to drag him toward the door, she felt her lungs scream for air. The room spun. Her vision threatened to darken. She refused to give in, though something in her, a fierce determination, kept her going. James's weight bore down on her, but she focused on one step at a time, pulling him inch by agonizing inch. Somewhere behind them, a fiery explosion of sparks rained from the collapsing ceiling. Samantha shielded James with her own body as debris crashed around them. She wasn't sure if she screamed or if the roar was only in her head. She just knew she had to keep moving forward, searching for a chance, any chance, to escape the merciless flames enveloping them both. Samantha's ears rang with the roar of the flames as she strained to pull James across the corridor. Blistering heat pressed in from all sides, and the ceiling above groaned ominously. Every breath felt like inhaling shards of broken glass. Dark smoke made it nearly impossible to see more than a foot in front of her, but she remembered the route to the stairwell by heart. She could hear the muffled sound of Thomas Wu's voice on a radio somewhere below. "Fourth floor. Are we sure it's cleared? Repeat, do we have everyone?" The signal crackled. Samantha tried to shout for help, but her throat felt raw and scorched. James remained limp, his right leg slightly bent at an awkward angle, and part of his shirt was singed. She fought a rising tide of panic and forced herself to keep going. Her fingers clenched around the fire extinguisher's handle, using it intermittently to quell small bursts of flame that blocked their path. When the extinguisher sputtered empty, she tossed it aside. Flames crawled along the wallpaper, devouring the old floral patterns. She prayed the structure wouldn't collapse on them before they escaped. One step at a time, she dragged James toward the stairwell, ignoring the searing pain in her arms and the hot embers that landed on her uniform. The hallway seemed endless. Her vision blurred, and her lungs burned fiercely. Finally, her outstretched hand found the metal railing of the stairwell entrance. She staggered forward, pulling James behind her. "Help!" she rasped, trying to raise her voice. Smoke filled her mouth, cutting off her cry. She dropped to her knees, choking as she reached for the stairwell door. Somehow, she managed to shove it open with her shoulder and slide them both onto the landing. Fresh air felt like a miracle. Except the flames had found their way here, too. Smoke billowed down the stairs, and the heat was still intense. Samantha braced herself, hooking both arms around James's torso. Step by step, she backed down the staircase, struggling under his weight. Each footfall was uncertain, the steps slick with soot and water from the sprinklers overhead. Her muscles trembled with exhaustion. She lost count of the floors, focusing only on placing one foot below the other. By the time she reached the second floor, a team of firefighters appeared through a haze of grey. "Over here!" one shouted, voice echoing through his oxygen mask. A second firefighter rushed forward, helping Samantha support James's limp form. Together, they carried him onto a landing, where paramedics with a gurney waited. Samantha could hardly stand upright. Black dots swam in her vision. She heard someone yelling, "She's going into shock!" Another hand, someone strong, lifted her from behind, guiding her down the final flight of stairs. Cold night air slapped her face as they emerged outside. A wave of relief and disorientation hit her. Sirens blared. Red and blue lights strobed across the parking lot. Hotel guests, many wrapped in blankets, huddled together at a safe distance. She glimpsed Lisa Chen's tear-streaked face among the crowd, and Thomas Wu leaning heavily on a fire truck, clutching a radio. They placed James on a stretcher, an oxygen mask covering his face. Samantha staggered forward, ignoring her own pain. She reached out, wanting reassurance that he was still alive. A paramedic intercepted her, pressing a mask over her mouth. "Breathe," he instructed firmly. "You have smoke inhalation and burns. Let us help." Her body finally refused to move. The adrenaline that had propelled her this far drained away, leaving exhaustion and stinging pain. Her chest heaved for oxygen, and she collapsed onto a nearby gurney. As she drifted in and out of consciousness, she sensed the bustle around her, people shouting directions, the roar of the fire trucks, the sprinklers still hissing inside the hotel. She locked eyes momentarily with James, or thought she did. His face was bruised, a gash near his temple bleeding, but his eyelids fluttered like he might regain awareness. Then darkness claimed her, and all the chaotic sounds seemed to vanish as if someone had turned a dial, leaving only the quiet hush of her own heartbeat. Sunlight leaked through the half-drawn curtain when Samantha finally stirred. She blinked groggily. her throat raw and her lungs aching with each shallow breath. White hospital walls came into view, sterile and unfamiliar. A dull pain spread across her arms and shoulders, and as she tried to shift, she felt the sting of raw skin where bandages wrapped her forearms. She groaned softly, the effort of movement almost too much to bear. An IV line snaked from her wrist to a fluid bag overhead. Machines beeped in measured intervals, and the faint scent of antiseptic filled the air. She realized she must be in a hospital room, somewhere close to downtown Chicago, judging by the faint hum of traffic outside. Across the small space, Elena Rodriguez stood up from a vinyl chair, tears of relief shining in her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, thank goodness you're awake," she said, rushing to Samantha's side. Despite Eleanor's usual warmth, worry lined her forehead. "What happened?" Samantha rasped. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Her last memories were of flames, debris, and a desperate attempt to save James. Eleanor pressed a hand over Samantha's bandaged forearm gently. "You were badly burned on your arms and back, and you inhaled a lot of smoke. They had you sedated for a few days to help you recover. The doctors, they weren't sure how long you'd be out." A lump formed in Samantha's throat. Days. She let her gaze wander around the room, noticing an enormous bouquet of orchids and lilies by the window, a small card tucked among the blossoms. All it said was J.B. in neat letters. "Is he—" Elena nodded. "James Bennett. He's been here too. He has a broken arm and some internal injuries, but he's recovering. He's in a different room on the same floor." Relief and confusion battled for space in Samantha's heart. She wanted to see him, to confirm with her own eyes that he was alive, but pain insisted she lie still. "My father, Robert, does he know?" Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed. "He's fine, just worried. He's been here every day, but he's exhausted. I sent him home to rest, and I promised to stay with you until he comes back tonight." Tears threatened to spill as Samantha pictured her frail father pacing hospital corridors, racked with guilt that she had risked her life while he could only watch from the sidelines. She squeezed Elena's hand, trying to muster gratitude for how her friend had stepped in yet again. A soft knock sounded at the door, and a middle-aged man in a white coat entered. Dr. Green, according to his ID badge. He greeted Samantha with a reassuring nod. "We've been monitoring your burns. They're primarily second degree, with a few patches we need to watch carefully. Your lungs suffered from smoke inhalation, so you'll stay on oxygen until your breathing improves." He adjusted an IV drip and offered a sympathetic smile. "You did a brave thing, Ms. Jones. Rest and heal for now. Job worries or anything else can wait." But even as he said it, her mind returned to the question of the Lakeside Hotel. Lisa's text messages, left unread on Samantha's phone, likely contained updates. The building must have suffered serious damage. How would the staff survive financially? And what about her father's threatened eviction? By late afternoon, Samantha drifted in and out of a medicated haze. She woke to find Robert by her bedside, eyes hollow with concern. He pressed her hand gently. "I'm so sorry, my girl," he murmured, voice breaking. "You wouldn't be in this state if—" "Don't," Samantha whispered, voice trembling. "It was my choice. I had to help." He nodded, tears wetting his cheeks, but said nothing more. Across the room, Elena quietly spoke with a nurse about medication schedules, occasionally casting sympathetic glances in Samantha's direction. Eventually, the day waned into evening. Samantha closed her eyes, exhausted by the steady march of pain. Just as she drifted toward sleep again, she heard a soft voice at the doorway. "May I come in?" She opened her eyes to see James Bennett, one arm in a sling, holding a fresh bouquet of roses. Bruises shadowed one side of his face, and a white bandage covered his forehead. Relief coursed through her at the sight of him standing upright, despite the injuries. But 1,000 questions crowded her mind, and she wasn't sure how to begin asking them. Over the next week, James Bennett became a fixture in Samantha's hospital room. Each morning, he arrived with fresh flowers, lilies one day, sunflowers the next, despite her teasing protest that she hardly had space for so many bouquets. At first, their conversations were stilted. She was still processing the fact that she'd nearly lost her life rescuing him, and he carried a certain guilt in his eyes, as though the entire ordeal weighed heavily on him. He'd sit by her bedside in a plastic chair, arm encased in a sling, face paler than before. "I'll never be able to repay what you did," he said on the second morning, carefully resting his coffee on the windowsill. The tension in his voice belied a deeper turmoil. "You risked your life." "And for me..." Samantha tried to shrug, only to wince at the sharp pull on her bandaged shoulders. "I couldn't just leave you," she answered softly. "It's not who I am." Between these daily visits, Samantha's father hovered anxiously alongside Eleanor, who ran small errands and fussed about the hospital room's tidiness. In quieter moments, Samantha caught glimpses of James speaking with Dr. Green, inquiring about her treatment. One day, she overheard him offering to connect the hospital with specialists he knew. The mention of specialists piqued her curiosity. What exactly did James do to have such influential contacts? A few days later, she found out more details during a routine check of her vitals. Dr. Rebecca Morgan, the head nurse in her early 50s with warm eyes and a calm demeanor, had seen James in the hallway. "Your friend seems awfully knowledgeable about medical procedures and administrative complexities," Dr. Morgan commented, tapping an IV bag. "He's not just a curious bystander. You sure you know who he is?" Samantha hesitated. "He told me he's a writer," she answered. But even as she said it, she recalled the corporate papers in his hotel room. Her gut twisted with the suspicion that James wasn't telling the full story. Still, she felt an inexplicable pull toward him, a gratitude mingling with compassion for whatever secrets he might carry. Their talks became more personal as the days passed. James confessed he'd grown up under intense pressure to succeed, dropping vague references to a corporate environment he had left behind to find himself. Samantha spoke of her father's fragile health, her mother's passing, and her regrets about a marriage that ended in betrayal. Sometimes, when James was quiet, she noticed him wrestling with something unsaid. One afternoon, she mustered the nerve to bring it up. "You know a lot about business for someone who claims to be a traveling writer." He paused, fingers tightening around the coffee cup he held. "I used to work for a major corporation," he admitted, blue eyes darting away. "Let's just say I needed a break from all that." The conversation lingered in her mind long after he left. That night, Robert dozed in the chair beside her, while Elena went home to rest. The hospital halls were quieter, lights dimmed for the evening. Samantha examined the card from the first bouquet James had brought. J.B. The simple initials seemed to conceal a world of mystery. She thought about the rumors swirling around Pilsen, the mention of Bennett Technologies. Could it be coincidence that James's last name was Bennett? Doubt pricked at her conscience, but she pushed it aside. He came to see her every day, told her jokes to keep her spirits up, and offered meaningful, genuine comfort. Whoever he was, he seemed to care about her well-being in a way few others had. Later that night, Dr. Morgan checked Samantha's wounds and offered a rare smile. "You're healing quickly," she said. "I'd expect no less from a woman who charges into burning buildings." Samantha gave a tired laugh, wincing at the sting in her shoulders. Still, hearing she was improving gave her hope that life might return to some kind of normal. When James returned the next morning, he carried a small bag of homemade cookies from a nearby bakery. "Got them fresh at dawn," he announced with a slight smile. Samantha thanked him, her heart lifting at the simple gesture. Yet beneath that warmth, a quiet question smoldered. When would the truth of who James Bennett really was finally come to light? A fresh wave of physical therapy sessions arrived for Samantha, focusing on her burned arms and shoulders. Marcus Johnson, a lively 38-year-old therapist, breezed into her hospital room with upbeat music on his phone and a bright grin. Tall and broad-shouldered, Marcus had a knack for coaxing reluctant patients into movement. He made Samantha rotate her arms gently, stretch her bandaged shoulders, and massage the stiff areas. "That's it, Ms. Jones," he said, nodding approvingly as she followed his instructions. "You're doing great. Just a few more repetitions, and we'll call it a day." Though her arms throbbed and her back twinged with every movement, Samantha appreciated Marcus's steady support. Still, her thoughts wandered to more pressing matters, namely the fact that her father, Robert, had been readmitted for observation after experiencing sudden chest pains. The stress of the eviction threat and Samantha's accident had taken its toll on him. Now father and daughter shared the same hospital corridor, a tragic but oddly convenient arrangement. James often joined Samantha and Robert for small conversations in the afternoon, bringing herbal tea or reading passages from classic novels at Robert's request. Despite the bruises and a cast on his arm, James exuded a gentle determination, as if caring for Samantha's father was not just kindness, but a personal mission. In these moments, Samantha felt a warmth toward him that clashed with the nagging suspicion about his identity. One day, Elena arrived with grim news. More families in Pilsen had received warnings about property acquisitions. The name Bennett Technologies surfaced yet again in the letters circulating among neighbors. Samantha's anxiety flared. She couldn't shake the feeling that James, her James, was connected to all of this, no matter how genuinely caring he seemed. Later that evening, after Marcus finished another therapy session, James came by to check on Samantha. She sat in a plush chair by the window, her arms resting on cushions, the city skyline spread out beyond the glass, the bright lights of Chicago twinkling like a promise just out of reach. He settled into the chair next to her, exhaling slowly. "How are you feeling?" he asked, leaning forward with concern. She stared at him for a moment, struggling to find the right words. "Physically, I'm healing," she answered softly. "But I'm worried about my father. And my neighborhood. The residents keep getting these notices to sell. It's scaring a lot of people." James's eyes flickered with an emotion she couldn't decipher. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said carefully. "There must be some corporation behind it, right?" Samantha studied his face. She noticed the subtle tension in his jaw, the guarded look in his eyes. Before she could press him further, "Doctor." Morgan peeked in with a chart, announcing that Robert's latest test results were relatively stable. Samantha let out a breath of relief, grateful that at least one piece of news was positive. Meanwhile, Lisa Chen stopped by to deliver an update. The Lakeside Hotel had been declared unfit for immediate operation, with rumors that Bennett Technologies had moved to acquire the property. She looked at James warily, though she said nothing. Samantha's chest tightened, another bit of evidence pointing to the corporation and possibly to James himself. Still, she held her tongue, unwilling to hurl accusations without clarity. Over the following days, James's presence continued to puzzle her. He was attentive, considerate, and made every effort to assist Robert with doctors' recommendations, sometimes even whispering that he could pull a few strings. One afternoon, Samantha found James and Robert huddled over a small anthology of American literature, discussing Hawthorne's short stories. Robert's face lit with intellectual vigor, a far cry from his usual fatigue. Marcus, finishing a session nearby, grinned at Samantha. "He's a good man, you know," the therapist said quietly, nodding at James. "I've seen plenty of family members who barely show up. But that guy, he's here every day." Conflicted, Samantha managed a small smile. She couldn't deny that James's devotion touched her. The more time he spent with her father, the more she glimpsed unexpected depths in him. Yet each piece of gossip about Bennett Technologies stung like a thorn, reminding her that the man she was coming to trust might be directly involved in the threat facing her home. Unsure whether to confront him or cherish his help, she let the days drift by in a swirl of therapy sessions, hushed hospital corridors, and the quiet forging of an unlikely bond with the man she'd pulled from a burning room, still uncertain if he was the very one capable of lighting a different kind of fire in her life. Samantha stood under the hospital's entrance awning, squinting in the pale winter sun. She had just been discharged after weeks of recovery for second-degree burns and smoke inhalation. Her right arm still bore pink, tender skin where the bandages had recently been removed. She cradled her few belongings in a paper bag, relief mingling with a pang of uncertainty. Her job at the lakeside was gone, and her father's living situation hung by a thread. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. The driver, dressed in a crisp suit, leaped out and opened the passenger door with the kind of deference typically reserved for CEOs. Samantha hesitated. James Bennett leaned out from the back seat, one arm still in a sling. "Let me give you a ride home," he said gently. "You've been through enough." She glanced behind her, catching a glimpse of Elena and Lisa saying their goodbyes. Lisa flashed a quick thumbs up, as if encouraging Samantha to accept. Tentatively, she climbed into the car. The leather seats had that new, polished smell, and the dashboard electronics looked state-of-the-art. It was a far cry from the cramped city bus she normally rode. "How's your father?" James asked, as the car pulled into traffic. "They're keeping him a bit longer," she replied, shifting uncomfortably. "His heart's still too weak to be discharged." James nodded, concern etched on his face. "I've been talking to a few specialists. I can see if they'll visit him. No cost to you." She stared down at her lap. "I appreciate that," she said softly, before glancing at him. "It's very generous." Inwardly, she wrestled with the question that had plagued her for days. Why does he have all these connections? Who, exactly, is James Bennett? Their conversation dropped into a tense silence until the driver turned onto a familiar street. Samantha noticed the driver addressing James as Mr. Bennett, with a polite gravity that suggested more than just a passing respect. Once they arrived at her modest apartment building, Samantha's suspicions grew. The driver rushed to open the door for her, then carefully carried her paper bag of belongings up the short flight of steps. It was a stark contrast to how she usually struggled with groceries alone. She invited James inside, partly out of politeness and partly because she wanted answers. Though the living room was modest, mismatched furniture cluttered with leftover bills, the table was laden with fresh groceries and expensive home care items Samantha couldn't possibly afford. Her mouth fell open. She turned to James. "Did you arrange all this?" He avoided her gaze. "I asked Elena if there was anything I could help with. You needed healthy food, supplies." Something in his tone made the hair on her arms prickle. "These brands are high-end," she murmured, picking up an unfamiliar label. "You're a writer who's been hospitalized, yet you can afford all this." She didn't want to sound ungrateful, but her curiosity had officially turned into suspicion. Before James could respond, his phone rang, displaying the name Emily Bennett, CFO. He declined the call almost immediately, but the words glared at Samantha in bold letters. CFO? As in Chief Financial Officer? And the last name Bennett. She bit her lip, chest tightening with the realization that something bigger was at play. Trying to maintain composure, she led James back to the door. "Thank you for bringing me home," she said, heart hammering. "I need some time to settle in." He lingered, looking like he wanted to say more. Finally, he nodded. "I'll call you tomorrow. See how you're doing." After he left, she sank onto the sofa, unsettled. Was he the same Bennett behind Bennett Technologies, the corporation buying up properties in her neighborhood? The man who had just escorted her home so tenderly might be tied to the looming eviction notices. Staring at the array of fancy groceries, Samantha felt torn, grateful for his generosity, but haunted by the possibility that he was the architect of her father's displacement. The seeds of mistrust took root, leaving her wondering what other truths James Bennett had yet to reveal. The next evening, Samantha found herself at a chic restaurant downtown, its exterior framed by gleaming windows overlooking the Chicago River. James had arranged a celebratory dinner to mark her hospital discharge. Despite her reservations, she agreed, hoping the meeting might clarify some of her growing doubts. She arrived to find James already seated at a candlelit table, scanning the menu with casual ease. When he rose to greet her, she noticed how the maitre d' addressed him with respectful familiarity, bowing slightly. Questions swirled in her mind. Was James a frequent patron here? They settled into plush chairs as the waiter recited a list of gourmet specials. Samantha's stomach twisted, unsure if her nerves would allow her to eat. She forced a smile when James ordered a bottle of fine wine. She couldn't ignore how his presence radiated a certain authority, one that hadn't been obvious during his hospital visits when he was injured and vulnerable. When the waiter left, Samantha glanced around at the polished marble floors, the subtle piano music, and well-dressed patrons. She felt out of place in her off-the-rack dress, the best she could manage on short notice. James reached for her hand, but she pulled it back gently, determined to address the elephant in the room. "James," she began carefully, "I need you to be straight with me. Are you, or are you not, associated with Bennett Technologies?" He exhaled, running his free hand over the white tablecloth. "I used to work in an executive role," he admitted, "but that's all behind me now." His gaze was earnest, yet she caught the hint of discomfort in his voice. "That's it." Her tone carried an edge of challenge. "Because I keep hearing about this company buying up my neighborhood. People are scared. My father's on the verge of eviction, and your phone lights up with calls from someone labeled CFO. That doesn't sound like you left it all behind." He shifted uneasily. "Okay, Emily, my sister, is the CFO. She's been handling some major acquisitions, but I haven't been directly involved. I promise." He leaned forward, a note of desperation coloring his words. "I came to Chicago to get away from the corporate life, at least for a while. You have to believe me." Before Samantha could respond, a sharply dressed man approached their table, recognition lighting his features. "Mr. Bennett, good to see you again, sir. Hope your father's well." James tensed. Samantha's heart sank. Clearly, this man knew James more intimately than a passing acquaintance. The stranger cleared his throat, realizing he'd interrupted. "My apologies," he murmured before stepping away. In the awkward silence that followed, Samantha struggled to keep her composure. "He called you Mr. Bennett and mentioned your father. This is more than just some old job you left behind." James's face drained of color, as though cornered. "I am an executive," he said slowly, choosing each word carefully. "In fact, I'm a key figure at Bennett Technologies. I didn't tell you everything because I wanted to escape the scrutiny, the constant pressure. In the hospital, you treated me like a normal person, and I didn't want that to change." Samantha's chest felt tight. "So it was a lie." His eyes pleaded with her. "It wasn't a lie, not at first. I booked that hotel under a pseudonym to get away from corporate chaos. Then the fire happened, and you saved me. After that, everything changed. I know I should have been honest sooner." She looked down at her trembling hands. The tapestry of their connection, her risking her life for him, their shared hospital days, suddenly felt tangled in deception. "You knew my father and I live in Pilsen," she whispered, voice raw. "You knew that area's being bought up by your company. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" James shook his head. "I'm sorry. I truly didn't intend for any of this. Give me a chance to explain more tomorrow." Samantha's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed in public. The waiter appeared, setting down 2 ornate salads neither would touch. She swallowed hard, uncertain if she could remain at the table. Part of her wanted to walk away. Another part yearned for the man she thought she knew, the one who brought her flowers in the hospital and read literature with her father. Yet that man was also the corporate mogul who might be threatening her home. Samantha stared at him, grappling with 2 conflicting faces of James Bennett, unsure which one she was meant to trust. The next morning, James arrived at Samantha's apartment with a tray of hot coffees and a box of pastries, clearly determined to continue their difficult conversation. She let him in, crossing her arms protectively over her bandaged forearms. Robert was still in the hospital, so the living room stood silent, except for the hum of the old radiator. "All right," she said quietly, taking a seat on the worn couch. "You said you'd explain." James placed the pastries on the coffee table. He looked around the room, as though measuring every detail, then took a slow breath. "I started Bennett Technologies 15 years ago with my father and sister. It grew fast, bigger than I could ever have imagined. Over time, we expanded into real estate, among other ventures." Samantha's shoulders tightened, remembering the demolition rumors. "And the project in Pilsen?" He nodded, gaze downcast. "Our board approved a large redevelopment plan, thinking it would revitalize the area. I stepped away from day-to-day responsibilities a few months back, but the project went forward. I only recently learned about the scale. Entire blocks, including older housing. I swear I didn't know all the details." She folded her hands, fighting the wave of anger threatening to rise. "People in my community, good, hard-working folks, are terrified of losing their homes. My father and I included." James pressed a hand to his forehead, tension visible. "I understand that now. I was so wrapped up in corporate expansion, I never thought about the human cost. But I'm trying to fix it. Since I discovered your situation, I've been making calls, trying to halt evictions." She sighed, resisting the pull of wanting to believe him. "So you can pull strings. Why not just stop it all? Or is that not within your power?" He hesitated, and for a moment she saw genuine regret in his eyes. "I can't unilaterally end the project. There are shareholders, other executives, massive sums of money already invested, but I do have influence, enough to propose changes at least." Her frustration surfaced in a trembling voice. "You let me think you were just an ordinary guy, some traveling writer. All this time, my father's been on the brink of eviction. You sent me flowers in the hospital while your company threatened to bulldoze my neighborhood." James met her gaze. "My intention was never to deceive you. I needed anonymity, just for a while. When I met you, you saw me as a person, not a billionaire CEO. It felt liberating. But then everything happened so fast. The fire, your injuries. I didn't know how to reveal the truth." Silence weighed the room down. The only sound was the distant honk of a car outside. Samantha stared at the tray of pastries, appetite gone. She thought of Robert lying in the hospital bed, how proud he'd been to see her muster the courage to rescue someone. Yet here she was, confronted with a moral crossroads. Could she trust James to stand by his promise? At length she spoke, voice subdued. I believe you care. But caring isn't enough if you keep secrets or refuse to acknowledge the damage your company might do. He moved closer, carefully placing a hand on hers. The familiar warmth of his presence threatened to break her resolve. "Then help me," he said softly. "Show me what's happening to your neighborhood. Let me see the families, hear their stories. If I can show the board a personal perspective, maybe I can shift their plans." She wanted to recoil, but something about his tone felt earnest. "Why should I trust you?" "Because," James said, "you saved my life. I owe you not just my gratitude, but my honesty. Let me prove I'm serious." Her heart pounded. Part of her longed to push him away, certain that trusting him would only lead to more betrayal. Another part, the one that recalled his attentive hospital visits and genuine affection for her father, whispered that maybe redemption was possible. Samantha exhaled. "All right," she said at last. "I'll give you a chance to see what your company is doing to real people, but this doesn't mean I forgive you yet. You have to earn that." He nodded, relief flickering across his face. "Thank you. I won't let you down." But as he left, Samantha couldn't ignore the tangle of emotions swirling inside: anger, hope, lingering affection, and a deep sense of uncertainty about the truths he still withheld. Later that week, Samantha found herself waiting in a public library, thin winter light filtering through tall windows. She sat at a wooden table strewn with newspapers and community bulletins. The place smelled of old books and earnest learning, reminding her of her father's days as a literature professor. Determined to glean more information about James and his company, she scoured archived business journals, local news articles, and press releases. A mild tremor ran through her bandaged fingers whenever she stumbled on the name Bennett Technologies. The corporate achievements were staggering: software innovation, renewable energy investments, real estate holdings. And there, in a prominent cover story from a few years ago, was a photograph of James Bennett, flanked by Emily Bennett, CFO. The accompanying headline lauded him as a self-made billionaire and visionary CEO. Her heartbeat thumped hard. The article detailed expansions into underserved neighborhoods across several cities, often couched in friendly language, about revitalization. But the underlying statistics told a harsher story: rent hikes, demolitions, and displacement of lower-income residents. Samantha set down the article, a flood of disappointment and anger washing over her. While some areas had eventually thrived, the immediate toll on existing communities loomed large. In one magazine, an older feature described James's father, an influential magnate who'd passed away the previous year, leaving James and Emily to steer the company. The subtext suggested friction in the leadership, James aiming for philanthropic projects while Emily focused on maximizing profit. Samantha chewed her lip, recalling how James had seemed out of place in that luxurious restaurant, the regret in his eyes. Could there be truth in his claim that he'd stepped away, only to return when he realized the damage happening under his family's name? She printed a few key articles, then made her way to the cafe near the library's entrance. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed softly as she sipped stale coffee, her thoughts drifting to the painful scene in the hospital corridor when James first insisted on helping her father. He had seemed so sincere, yet the facts on paper were stark. He hadn't just lied, he'd orchestrated a second identity to avoid corporate pressures. Drained, she stepped out into the freezing wind of Chicago's late afternoon. On the sidewalk, she nearly collided with a group of tourists, then heard a familiar voice calling her name. Turning, she saw Lisa Chen, wearing a wool hat and clutching a grocery bag. Lisa greeted her with a tight hug, relief evident on her face. "How are you?" Lisa asked, concern etched across her features. "I've been calling, but you never pick up," Samantha shrugged. I'm all right, physically, just a lot on my mind. Lisa's eyes flicked to the bundle of printed articles under Samantha's arm. Research, huh? Samantha nodded, bracing herself against the cold, trying to figure out how far James's influence goes and if he can actually help us. Lisa pulled her aside to avoid blocking foot traffic. Well, word around the Lakeside staff is that James, Mr. Bennett, paid out severance packages for everyone after the fire. People are saying it was unusually generous. Some even think the hotel's employees might be rehired once the building is rebuilt. Samantha's mouth twitched in surprise. Really? That's not typical of a ruthless corporation. Lisa lowered her voice. I'm not defending him, but it's possible he's not the villain everyone assumes. At least, not entirely. They parted ways soon after, Lisa needing to pick up her young son from daycare. Samantha resumed her walk home, gloved fingers tightening around the stack of articles. The more she uncovered, the more complicated the truth became. On one hand, Bennett Technologies had inflicted real harm on communities like hers. On the other, James appeared to be taking steps, albeit belated ones, to mitigate that harm. When she finally reached her apartment, she slumped onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. The confrontation she'd been dreading was inevitable. She'd discovered enough about James to confirm he held genuine power at Bennett Technologies. If he was truly repentant, or planning a reversal in Pilsen, that might offer a glimmer of hope. But if he was stalling for time or trying to buy her silence with kindness, she wasn't sure her heart could endure another betrayal. Her eyes flicked to a photo of her father as a younger, healthier man, smiling wide and proud. She resolved that no matter how this played out, she'd fight for her home and the people she loved, even if it meant standing up against the man she'd once risked her life to save. Days stretched into a blur as Samantha navigated doctor's appointments for her father, all while trying to field anxious calls from neighbors who faced imminent eviction. On top of that, James was persistently trying to contact her, leaving voicemails filled with apologies and explanations. She neither accepted nor returned his calls, needing space to think. Late one afternoon, she arrived at Robert's hospital room to find Emily Bennett, James's sister and CFO of Bennett Technologies, already there, standing by the bed with a guarded expression. Emily was in her early 40s, impeccably dressed in a sleek grey suit. It struck Samantha how her poised demeanor contrasted sharply with James's more disheveled sincerity. Robert, propped against pillows, looked frail but attentive. He gestured for Samantha to come in. Emily Bennett stopped by, he explained weakly. She wants to talk. Samantha placed a comforting hand on her father's shoulder. I see. She turned to face Emily, ready for a confrontation. If this is about Pilsen, you should know people are scared and angry. Emily regarded her coolly. I'm aware, and I realize you have good reason to mistrust me, and perhaps my brother as well. But I'm here to ask you to consider hearing James out. He's deeply affected by everything that's happened. Samantha folded her arms, remembering the avalanche of half-truths she'd uncovered. Why does he need you to speak for him? Emily sighed. Because he's not thinking clearly. He's been cancelling crucial meetings, pushing to completely restructure the redevelopment project, and clashing with major investors. This is not business as usual for him. Ever since the fire, he's shown a side of himself I've never seen. Whether you believe it or not, you've changed him. Startled by her frankness, Samantha studied Emily's expression. She seemed genuinely concerned about her brother. What exactly do you want me to do? Just listen to him, Emily replied. He's requested a formal review of the Pilsen project, something that could buy time for residents. But the board is skeptical. If you testify about the community's needs, they might modify the redevelopment plans. Samantha's pulse quickened. The idea of presenting her father's and neighbors' experiences to a corporate board was daunting, but it could be a chance to protect Pilsen. I'm willing to speak, but only if James is serious about changing the approach, not merely appeasing me. He is, Emily said firmly, casting a glance at Robert, who coughed softly. But you should know, there's pushback from within the company. Some believe James has grown too sentimental. They want the original plan, which means full demolition. Samantha let out a bitter laugh. Sentimental? Because he doesn't want to kick elderly people out of their homes. Emily's gaze shifted to the floor. I never said it was right, just that it's how they see the situation. She paused, then continued. James asked me to give you this. She extended a plain white envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Dear Samantha, I know I've failed you with my secrecy, but I'm fighting now for you, your father, and everyone in Pilsen. Give me one more chance to prove it. Please, James. A flutter of conflicting emotions rippled through Samantha. She remembered the way he'd held her hand in the hospital, read poems to her father, and risked corporate backlash to ensure hotel staff got fair severances. Could there be truth in Emily's claim that he was genuinely changing? She lifted her eyes to meet Emily's. All right, she said in a measured tone. I'll listen. But if I sense any manipulation, I walk. And I'll fight with everything I have to stop Bennett Technologies from destroying my neighborhood. Emily offered a small nod, relief softening her features. I understand. I'll let James know. After Emily left, Robert reached for Samantha's hand. You've always had a good heart, he said gently. Just be sure the man you're trusting has one, too. Samantha sank into the chair next to his bed, the weight of looming consequences heavy on her shoulders. One path led to possible betrayal, the other to a community's devastation if she refused to engage. No matter the choice, everything in her life felt poised on the brink of irrevocable change. Wind rattled the windows of the hospital hallway as Samantha paced back and forth, waiting for James to arrive. Her father's doctor had just finished an exam, warning that Robert's heart condition was worsening under stress. The need for stable housing felt more urgent than ever. She hadn't slept well for nights, grappling with the moral weight of trusting James. She could forgive him for the initial deception, perhaps, but what if his corporate obligations prevented him from truly changing the fate of Pilsen? The thought of uprooting her father, who could barely walk from the hospital to a car, let alone endure a sudden move, sent a jolt of fear through her. Just as she paused at the wide hospital windows, James stepped off the elevator. His arm was still in a cast, and he looked visibly drained, dark circles under his eyes. Seeing her, he approached slowly, as if uncertain whether she'd greet him or walk away. Thank you for meeting me, he said, voice tight with apprehension. How's your father? She crossed her arms, partly for warmth, partly to steady her nerves. Not great. The doctor says stress could trigger another cardiac event. James's throat worked in a hard swallow. I'm sorry, he murmured. I've been coordinating with Emily and some of our board members. They've agreed to hold a special hearing about the Pilsen project next week. We'll review alternative proposals. Samantha's heart thudded with cautious hope. So you can stop the mass eviction? I'm trying. He gestured toward a bench by the window, and they both sat. This is bigger than me, though. Investors poured millions into the original plan. If we shift direction, we risk losing funding. She pinned him with a guarded look. And you're prepared to do that? He let out a slow breath. I realize now I can't keep turning a blind eye. Your bravery, saving my life, made me question everything I was building. We shouldn't measure success by how many properties we acquire. I want to do this differently. A spark of emotion welled up in Samantha's chest. He sounded sincere, yet fear of being hurt again held her back. "I can't forget that you hid your identity. My trust doesn't come easily anymore." James nodded, regret evident in his posture. "I understand. All I can do is be transparent now. I've hired a new legal counsel to review the Pilsen contracts, searching for ways to renegotiate or offer residents better options. But some on the board, like Victor Reynolds, a major partner, want to move forward without changes." Her face tensed at the surname. "Reynolds? Any relation to my ex-husband Michael?" James blinked. "I doubt it's the same family. Victor's in his 50s, but he's ruthless, driven purely by profit. If he gains the upper hand, this project won't spare your neighborhood." The corridor fell silent, except for the distant beep of medical machinery. Samantha tried to reconcile the tender man who sat beside her, with his bandaged arm and genuine concern, with the powerful CEO who stood at a crossroads of corporate ethics. Could he truly defy the very system that made him wealthy? "You say you've changed," she said at last. "Then prove it. Stand up to this Victor guy. Show the board there's a way to be both profitable and humane." James reached for her hand, then paused to gauge her reaction. She allowed him to take it carefully, mindful of her still healing burns. The contact felt like a fragile bridge between them. "I will," he promised. "Next week, we'll present a revised plan, mixed-income housing, preserving historic buildings, fair relocation for anyone who must move. And Samantha, I want you to speak at the meeting. Share stories of the elders, the families. Let them see these aren't just properties, they're people's lives." She inhaled, torn between anxiety and a flicker of determination. "I'll do it for my father, and for our neighbors. But if this fails, I won't go quietly." He offered a small, somber smile. "I wouldn't expect anything less from the woman who ran into a burning building to save a stranger." They sat there a moment longer, hands clasped. The old Samantha might have melted into the romance of it all, but the new Samantha, tempered by betrayal and adversity, was prepared for the fight of her life. Their internal battles mirrored the storms gathering outside, both aware that the days ahead would test their resolve like never before. Samantha felt a surge of nerves as the elevator ascended to the 40th floor of the gleaming Bennett Technologies headquarters in downtown Chicago. James stood beside her, his cast partially hidden beneath a tailored suit jacket, exuding a quiet resolve. She remembered the warmth of his voice promising to change the course of the Pilsen project. Yet the glint of his company's logo in the polished elevator doors made her wonder if his good intentions could survive the brunt of corporate pragmatism. When they stepped out, Samantha found herself in a modern, spacious lobby lined with minimalist furniture and large windows, offering sweeping views of the city. Employees bustled around, some glancing curiously at her, others greeting James with a respectful, "Good morning, Mr. Bennett." Samantha's palms felt clammy. This was far beyond the humble realm of the Lakeside Hotel. He guided her into a large conference room, where a digital screen displayed the phrase, "Project Lakeside Redevelopment Proposal." Samantha's stomach clenched at the sight. Moments later, a stern-faced man in his mid-50s entered, Victor Reynolds, introduced as a major partner in the real estate ventures. He wore a crisp navy suit and carried himself with an air of self-assured importance. "So this is the famous Samantha Jones," Victor said, his tone clipped. "I've heard about your rescue efforts and your concerns about the Pilsen acquisitions." His eyes flicked toward James, then back to Samantha, as though sizing her up. James cleared his throat. "Victor, I've asked Ms. Jones here to present a perspective we've missed, a first-hand account of the community we're about to transform." Victor folded his arms. With all due respect, we have thorough data on property values, demographics, and projected returns. I'm not sure how anecdotal stories will affect our bottom line." Samantha bristled at the dismissive remark. She inhaled, summoning the courage that had carried her through the fire. Those anecdotal stories are families who've lived in Pilsen for generations, elderly folks on fixed incomes, immigrant parents with kids in local schools. If your plan pushes them out, you're not just demolishing buildings, you're tearing apart lives. Before Victor could retort, Emily Bennett joined them, holding a slim tablet. She acknowledged Samantha with a slight nod. "James and I have developed an alternative proposal," she said, connecting her device to the screen. "It includes preserving historical structures and adding mixed-income housing units. We'd also create a community center to replace the Lakeside Hotel site." James stepped forward. "This version reduces displacement and allows for affordable housing in tandem with new development. It's not about halting progress, but ensuring progress benefits everyone." Victor's frown deepened, but he listened as Emily displayed mock-ups of restored brownstones, updated storefronts, and newly constructed residential blocks designed to blend with the existing architecture. Samantha observed the images with a cautious spark of hope. Could this truly work? "It'll cost significantly more," Victor pointed out, narrowing his gaze at James. "And our investors will demand justification for that extra expense. Sentimentality doesn't pay dividends." James met Victor's glare evenly. "Our brand stands to gain from showing corporate responsibility. Long-term, that goodwill can be an asset, not a liability." He motioned to Samantha. "She can help us connect directly with the community, bridging trust gaps." Though still skeptical, Victor stared at the slides in thoughtful silence. Finally, he closed the file on the table. "We'll call a full board meeting to discuss this," he said slowly, "but don't expect an easy win. Numbers drive decisions here, not heroic anecdotes." He left without another word. Once the door clicked shut, Samantha exhaled, tension uncoiling in her shoulders. "He's intense," she whispered. Emily nodded. "It's an uphill climb, but the board will listen to James. He still has enough influence if he presents this carefully." James turned to Samantha, gratitude and determination mingling in his eyes. "Thank you for standing up for your community. We'll need your voice at the big meeting. It won't be enough to propose it. We have to convince them." Samantha glanced at the slideshow image of Pilsen, a place she called home. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said softly. "Just promise me you won't back down when it gets tough." James answered with a firm nod. "I promise." Snow flurries danced across the Chicago skyline as Samantha stepped off a city bus, bracing against a gust of icy wind. She had planned to bring James to see Pilsen in person, but he was tied up in back-to-back meetings with Emily, refining the alternative proposal. Instead, she decided to tour the neighborhood alone, hoping to gather stories and concerns directly from residents. Her father's hospital release was still uncertain, but he urged her on. "Go fight for us," he had said, clasping her hand in his. Her first stop was a small grocery store run by Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, longtime locals in their late 60s. They showed her around the cramped aisles and pointed to the faded photographs of their children taped near the register. Their voices trembled as they recounted how multiple buyout offers had arrived, each more insistent than the last. "We don't want to leave," Mrs. Martinez said, eyes welling with tears. "Our grandchildren were baptized at St. Matthew's Church down the block. All our memories are here." Samantha jotted down their fears in a notebook, her heart heavy with the weight of their stories. Next, she visited an elderly widow, Mrs. Hopkins, whose sagging apartment building bore a giant notice that it was under negotiation. "My husband and I moved here after he returned from Vietnam," Mrs. Hopkins whispered, showing Samantha old Polaroids. "He's gone now, and this apartment is all I have left of our life together." As dusk approached, Samantha paused at a local park, breath visible in the frigid air. She called James on her cell, quickly explaining the emotional day she'd had. She sensed him listening intently on the other end. "These people aren't just numbers," she concluded. "They're families, history, stories that can't be replaced with glass towers." "I hear you," James replied. "We need these voices at the board meeting. Their experiences might sway the skeptics." Still, an undercurrent of tension laced his voice, revealing the pressure he faced. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly. He sighed. "Victor is gathering investor support for the original plan. I may have to risk my stake in the company to push the alternative. If I fail, I could lose everything: my position, my influence, my father's legacy." Samantha felt her pulse pound. Could the man who claimed to love her neighborhood truly make such a sacrifice? "I won't ask you to ruin your life," she said softly. "But these people, my father, they've got nowhere else to turn." "It's not just your neighborhood that changed me," he admitted. "You changed me. If I walk away from this, I walk away from who I want to be." After they ended the call, Samantha gazed at the park statue of a local activist, a weathered plaque honoring his fight for workers' rights. She realized that every meaningful stand requires sacrifice. Perhaps the same was true for her relationship with James. She returned home late, exhaustion weighing on her like a lead blanket. Elena was waiting by the apartment door, concern etched on her face. "Your dad had a bad spell," she said. "He's stable again, but the doctors are worried about the stress." Samantha set her notebook down, anxiety flaring. "I'll visit him first thing tomorrow," she breathed. "There must be some solution, a place he can live where he won't be threatened with eviction." As the night wore on, she lay awake on the couch, thinking about the balancing act James faced. If he lost his leadership at Bennett Technologies, would the alternative plan die with him? If he caved in to Victor, would she ever be able to forgive him? The questions stretched like a chasm, too dark to navigate without faith in each other's resolve. In the quiet hours before dawn, she flipped through her notes, the heartfelt pleas of residents who depended on her. A wave of responsibility washed over her. She realized she was stepping into a role bigger than her personal feelings for James or even her father's plight. In fighting for Pilsen, she was defending the livelihoods of many who, like her, had always been invisible to those in power. She closed her eyes, silently praying for strength to see this through, no matter the cost. Samantha stepped into a cavernous boardroom where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Chicago's busy streets. High-backed leather chairs ringed a glossy walnut table, and a hush fell over the space as she entered with James and Emily at her side. She clutched a folder of community testimonies, her heart thundering. Every eye in the room fixed on them, some curious, others openly skeptical. At the head of the table sat Victor Reynolds, tapping a gold pen against his notebook. The tension in his posture radiated throughout the room. Executives, shareholders, and legal advisors lined the perimeter, waiting for the meeting to begin. James cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "I've called this special session to reevaluate our approach to Project Lakeside," he began. "We've all seen the numbers. Today, we have the chance to see the human side." Victor adjusted his suit jacket, leaning forward. "And how much time will this human side take from our schedule?" "Exactly." His sardonic tone earned a few chuckles, but James pressed on. Emily projected the revised plan onto a large screen. "The alternative proposal still generates profit, albeit less in the short term, but it fosters goodwill in the community, something that can bolster Bennett Technologies' reputation for decades." Victor shrugged, glancing at a spreadsheet. "Goodwill doesn't appear in revenue statements. Our investors expect higher returns from a prime location near downtown." Samantha inhaled sharply. It was her turn. She stood, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her blouse. "I understand all of you have a responsibility to your shareholders, but the people of Pilsen have been loyal to their neighborhoods for generations, building small businesses and homes that are cornerstones of the community. Displacing them isn't just a financial equation, it's a moral one." She opened her folder and began reading short testimonies. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, who faced losing their family-run grocery store; Mrs. Hopkins, whose late husband was a Vietnam veteran; photographs of families at birthday parties in humble backyards. As she spoke, her voice trembled with emotion. She paused to catch her breath, noticing how a few board members shifted uncomfortably. At the end of her presentation, a board member raised a hand. "Ms. Jones, I understand the sentiment, but can you guarantee your community will accept these changes if we go with the modified plan?" Samantha nodded. "Yes, they know some modernization is inevitable, but they want to be part of the conversation, not brushed aside. This plan means keeping historic buildings intact and ensuring affordable units remain available. It's a partnership, not a takeover." The room buzzed with hushed debates. Victor tapped his pen again, eyes narrowed at James. "You realize how drastically this cuts into our margins for at least the next 5 years. If we stay the course, we can maximize profits now." "Why delay?" James squared his shoulders. "Because making money is pointless if we destroy the trust of the very people we serve. Over time, that damage is far costlier. I'm prepared to invest more corporate resources in this plan, even if it affects short-term returns." Victor's gaze hardened. "And if the board rejects your proposal?" James met his eyes evenly. "I'll stand by it, even if it means putting my position on the line." A ripple of surprise spread around the table. Emily closed her eyes briefly, as if steeling herself for backlash. The tension thickened to the point where Samantha could almost taste it. One of the senior shareholders, an older woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, leaned forward. "There is a precedent," she said in a measured tone. "Some companies have gained long-term loyalty by adopting more socially responsible models. We're not short on funds. Maybe we can afford a bit of altruism." She shot a pointed look at Victor. "It might pay off in ways we can't immediately quantify." Murmurs broke out on either side. Victor scowled but remained silent. Emily seized the moment, proposing a formal vote in a week's time to finalize which version of Project Lakeside they'd adopt. As the meeting adjourned, Samantha felt her heart pounding from the intensity of the debate. Though no definitive victory had been declared, she noticed a flicker of cautious optimism in James's expression. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the step they'd just taken. Yet the corporate storm was far from over, and each passing minute brought them closer to a reckoning that could shape not only Pilsen's future, but also the fate of their fragile relationship. Headlines splashed across Chicago's newspapers the next day. CEO of Bennett Tech proposes drastic shift in major redevelopment. Some articles praised James's bold stance, while others mocked what they dubbed a heroic fairy tale. Corporate insiders leaked rumors of dissent among powerful investors. Samantha flipped through the papers in a coffee shop near the hospital, trying to quiet her apprehension before visiting her father. Walking into Robert's hospital room with 2 to-go cups of herbal tea, she found him sitting up, color returning to his cheeks. "Good morning, Dad," she said, placing the tea on the rolling tray. "You look better." He managed a faint smile. "That's because the nurses are spoiling me." Then he gave her a searching look. "I saw the news coverage. You really stood up in front of that board like I always knew you could." She gently squeezed his hand. "It's not over yet. The vote is still a week away. And trust me, Victor Reynolds isn't giving up. Over the next few days, Samantha sensed a growing resistance from both James's and her own circles. Some of her neighbors, wary of corporate motives, accused her of becoming too close to a billionaire. "He's buying you off," one older resident hissed, though she quickly apologized when Samantha stood her ground. Meanwhile, the invitation lists to social events in Chicago's upscale circles began to dry up for James. Emily reported that longtime associates questioned his judgment, worried that the company's philanthropic pivot would erode profits. It was subtle, but the shift in attitude was clear. He was no longer simply the brilliant CEO, but a liability to the business elite. In the midst of it all, James and Samantha tried to maintain a connection that felt increasingly fragile. One evening, he invited her to a formal fundraiser at a historic downtown hotel, a charitable event, ironically, for a children's literacy program. "We'll make an appearance," James said, "and maybe we can sway some hearts behind the scenes." She reluctantly agreed, uneasy about stepping into Chicago high society. Arriving in a borrowed cocktail dress, courtesy of Elena's resourceful sister, Samantha felt self-conscious from the moment she stepped onto the polished marble floor. Corporate VIPs mingled, the clink of champagne glasses and hum of polite conversation filling the ornate ballroom. James introduced her to former mentors and business allies. Though some were polite, others offered thin smiles and quickly shifted focus to safer topics than urban development. At one point, Samantha overheard a pair of executives whispering that James was throwing away his father's legacy on a naive dream. During a break, she and James escaped to a quieter balcony overlooking the twinkling city lights. He exhaled deeply, slipping a hand around her waist. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I know this scene isn't you. Honestly, it's never really been me either." She studied his face under the soft glow of decorative lanterns. "We could leave," she offered. "I can't win them over by forcing conversation." Before he could answer, a familiar figure emerged from the crowd, Victor Reynolds, accompanied by two stern-faced investors. "James," Victor said stiffly, ignoring Samantha's presence, "we need to discuss the vote. The numbers for your proposal don't look promising." James gestured for Samantha to stay, but Victor pressed on. "Your alternative plan is basically philanthropic nonsense, and everyone knows it. I'll fight it to the end." "Then we'll see you at the board meeting," James responded, struggling to keep an even tone. "We'll let the vote decide." Victor's lips curled into a smirk as he backed away. Samantha's heart hammered. His parting glance seemed to threaten more than just a corporate defeat. It carried the menace of someone who wouldn't hesitate to undermine James in any way possible. Back inside, the glitz and music felt strangely hollow. Samantha took James's hand. "Let's go," she whispered, voice shaking slightly. "I've had enough of these people for one night." He nodded, tension etched in his jaw. As they slipped past clusters of wealthy donors, Samantha realized the fight ahead was bigger than she'd imagined. Even if they convinced the board, they'd face ongoing hostility from those who saw compassion as weakness. Yet, she was more determined than ever to defend Pilsen, come what may, and to stand by James if he truly kept his promise to fight for change. A light drizzle coated the city in a sheen of grey as residents of Pilsen gathered at the old lakeside hotel site. Though most of the building's interior was gutted by the fire, the ornate exterior still stood as a testament to bygone elegance. Word had spread that Bennett Technologies' board would be deciding the property's fate in mere days. Despite the looming uncertainty, a sense of community pulsed through the crowd. Local families, small business owners, curious onlookers. Samantha arrived early, wearing a simple jacket with her bandaged arms covered. She'd organized a modest ceremony where neighbors could share hopes for the hotel's transformation. Plastic chairs were set in neat rows, and a makeshift stage held a microphone connected to scratchy speakers. She gazed at the charred doorframe where she once sprinted into flames to save a stranger who was no stranger anymore. People took turns stepping up to the mic. A retired teacher spoke of how the hotel had once hosted cultural events. A single mother recalled the friendly housekeepers and how the lakeside staff treated every guest like family. An older man reminisced about dancing with his wife in the once grand ballroom decades ago. Each story underscored the structure's role in the tapestry of local life. Halfway through the program, James slipped quietly into the back of the crowd, accompanied by Elena and Lisa. Samantha spotted him and felt a jolt of relief. Despite the swirl of corporate drama, he had come. And not as the CEO with a press entourage, just himself, hands tucked into his coat pockets. When the final speaker left the stage, Samantha stepped forward, voice trembling slightly as she took the mic. "We've talked a lot about the history of this place, but let's also think about what it could become, a center for community gatherings, for local art exhibits, for educational programs." She paused, meeting James's gaze in the crowd. "It can honor its past while serving the people who've cared for this neighborhood all their lives." A wave of applause swept through the audience, and Samantha felt tears prick her eyes. She set down the mic, stepping off the makeshift stage. The drizzle had lessened to a gentle mist, softening the air. As she wandered toward the back, James found her. "That was beautiful," he said quietly, sincerity shining in his blue eyes. "I had no idea so many people held memories of this place." She gave him a small smile. "You see now what's at stake. It's more than a burnt building. It's part of the neighborhood's soul." He nodded, heart heavy with responsibility. "I've asked the board to consider funding a foundation that will oversee the lakeside's transformation. If they agree, we could renovate the facade, create a mixed-use space, and keep it accessible to everyone. But someone needs to run it, someone who understands this community." Before she could register his meaning, he reached for her hand. "I'd like you to lead that foundation, Samantha." Her breath caught. "Me? I'm not an executive or a city planner." James's expression softened. "You're someone who risked everything to save a stranger, who fights for her neighbors, who speaks truth to power. You connect people. We can hire experts for the logistical work, but the heart of this place is what you can provide." An emotion too big to name swelled in her chest. She glanced at the blackened remnants of the hotel's interior, imagining fresh paint, new windows, and children's laughter echoing in the halls. The community had given her purpose beyond her personal struggles. Could she truly step into a leadership role? Tears shimmered in her eyes. I'll consider it, but I won't make any promises until after the board's vote." She tried to keep her voice steady. This dream could still be crushed, right? He squeezed her hand. "The final decision is days away, but whatever happens, I'm not giving up. You've shown me a different path, one I want to walk with you." For a long moment, they stood together in the light mist, the wreckage of the past all around them, and the possibility of a reborn future lingering in the air. Samantha felt both apprehension and the faint stirrings of hope. If the board approved the plan, it would mark a turning point for Pilsen, and for a woman who once deemed herself invisible, yet now found herself a pivotal force in forging a new chapter for her community. The day after the final board vote felt surreal to Samantha. She'd spent a sleepless night replaying every moment of the tense meeting, trying to read the expressions of each executive. At last, the decision had come through. A razor-thin majority sided with James's alternative plan. Standing in her modest living room, Samantha pressed a trembling hand to her mouth as the news finally sank in. They had won, at least enough to stop the demolition of her neighborhood, Late morning found her carrying a box of personal items into a newly leased apartment near downtown. It was bigger than her old place in Pilsen, with a small second bedroom for her father. After his latest checkup, the doctors believed he could be released from the hospital soon, provided he had a calm environment and the right in-home care. Samantha had accepted James's help for the down payment, a gesture she both appreciated and worried might compromise her independence. Still, the relief of securing a stable home for Robert outweighed her pride, and she promised herself she would repay every cent. While setting up Robert's bedroom, a space with wide windows and ample natural light, she heard a timid knock at the door. She opened it to find James, balancing a dish of homemade lasagna he'd attempted with limited culinary skill, wearing a hopeful grin. "I figured you might need lunch," he said, entering with a light laugh. "And I wanted to see the new place." Samantha guided him inside, the aroma of tomato sauce filling the living room. She couldn't help smiling at the sight of this polished CEO attempting a domestic gesture. He set the dish on the small kitchen counter, giving the tidy apartment a once-over. "It's not fancy, but it's safe and has good access to the hospital," Samantha explained, heading to the sink to wash her hands. "I can't thank you enough for helping with the deposit." James waved off her thanks. "This is the least I could do, after everything you've done for me and for the Lakeside project." He took in a breath, glancing at the bare walls. "I know you'll make it a warm home, and I hope your father recovers faster, knowing he has a place to call his own." They ate slices of the lasagna on paper plates, perched on folding chairs. Samantha chuckled at how the pasta was slightly overcooked, but she praised James's effort. It was a far cry from the lavish restaurant meals, where they'd once tried to reconcile his secrets. Here, everything felt more honest, more real. Once lunch was done, Samantha took him to a desk in the corner of the living room, cluttered with notebooks and files labeled Foundation Planning. She had agreed to head the new Lakeside Community Foundation, a role that still felt daunting. "We have to establish a formal board, coordinate with local leaders, and figure out a timeline for restoring the old hotel," she said, flipping through her notes. "I'm no expert, but I'm learning." James studied her with quiet admiration. "I have no doubt you'll excel at it. That place deserves someone who understands its history and its potential to bring people together." She felt a warmth at his words, but was also mindful of the challenges ahead. The alternative redevelopment plan might have passed, but many practical hurdles remained. Construction permits, securing additional funding for affordable units, and convincing skeptical locals that Bennett Technologies' shift wasn't just a PR move, would demand all her resolve. That evening, she drove James back to Pilsen so they could check on her father at the hospital. From the passenger seat, he gazed at the passing streets, each corner holding a mural or a local eatery he'd never noticed before. "I want to invest in these small businesses too," he mused. "Help them modernize without losing their essence." Samantha cast him a sideways glance, a faint smile on her lips. "You're learning that life isn't just spreadsheets, Mr. Bennett." He returned her smile with a gentle nod. "Every day, I learn a bit more, from you, from your father, from Pilsen itself." Pulling into the hospital parking lot, Samantha reached for his hand. She was no longer the invisible housekeeper, and he was no longer hiding behind a fabricated identity. Their worlds had collided in a blaze, and now they stood at the threshold of new beginnings. Both of them had chosen to rebuild, not just physical structures, but the very foundations of who they were becoming. 6 months later, the hum of construction vehicles echoed through the once silent grounds of the Lakeside Hotel. Samantha stood at the edge of the site, wearing a yellow hard hat and holding a clipboard. She watched a crane lift a beam into position, men in bright vests guiding it with precision. Brick by brick, the burned interior was being cleared, preserved walls fortified, and new steel supports put in place. Behind her, a makeshift sign read, "Future Home of the Lakeside Community Foundation and Cultural Center." Samantha traced the bold letters with pride. Though there was still an enormous amount of work ahead, this transformation, once unimaginable, was slowly becoming reality. James arrived soon after, impeccably dressed, even at a construction zone. "I just spoke with a group of local artists," he said, leaning in to give Samantha a quick kiss on the cheek. "They're eager to design murals for the interior once the walls go up." She brightened at the news. "That's perfect. We want to keep local culture front and center. The more the neighborhood feels invested, the better." Elena Rodriguez appeared, carrying a box of homemade cookies. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back neatly, and she had a friendly smile for everyone. "Thought the workers could use a snack," she said, passing the box to a nearby foreman. To Samantha's delight, Emily Bennett followed behind, looking slightly out of place in jeans and boots. The two women exchanged a polite nod. "I never thought I'd step onto a construction site," Emily confessed with a wry smile. "But James insisted I see how the new lakeside is shaping up." Elena took the opportunity to chat with Emily about local traditions, sharing tidbits about Pilsen's festivals and block parties. A genuine interest flickered in Emily's eyes, creating an unlikely bond between the retired nurse and the corporate CFO. They wandered off, cookies in hand, discussing the possibility of free health screenings and financial literacy workshops once the new facility opened. Watching them go, Samantha turned to James. "I still can't believe your sister warmed to the idea of a philanthropic branch of Bennett Technologies." He chuckled. "She's practical. Once she saw the community's enthusiasm and realized we could secure grants and partnerships, she came around. Having a socially responsible portfolio benefits the company's image too." Still, not everyone was on board. Victor Reynolds had attempted to stage a last-minute intervention, trying to rally investors to revert to the original plan. His efforts largely failed, yet tension lingered. Samantha often felt the weight of those corporate eyes still watching, waiting for the project to stumble. As part of bridging these two worlds, she'd started monthly meetings with community leaders and Bennett Tech representatives. The gatherings took place in a temporarily refurbished corner of the lakeside property, featuring mismatched chairs and folding tables. Over time, skepticism gave way to cautious optimism. Local shop owners found potential in new microloans, seniors appreciated planned recreational spaces, and younger residents embraced the idea of co-working areas. Amid this flurry of progress, Samantha's personal life saw its own changes. Robert, now living in her new apartment, had regained enough strength to teach volunteer classes on American literature at the community center library a few blocks away. She loved seeing him animated, discussing Dickens or Steinbeck with eager teenagers. One Saturday evening, as she returned from a meeting, Samantha entered her living room to find her father and James laughing over a worn copy of Walden by Thoreau. Robert's frailty was still evident, but a spark of vitality gleamed in his eyes. He looked at Samantha, expression turning soft. "I told James here, the only thing that separates a dream from reality is the courage to start building." Samantha felt a rush of gratitude flood her. So much had changed since the night of the fire. She'd discovered not just love, but a profound sense of purpose. James, too, seemed to have found a deeper meaning beyond corporate success. He immersed himself in forging genuine connections with the Pilsen community and supporting Samantha's vision for the foundation. It wasn't always easy. There were disagreements over budgets, frustrations with permits, and personal sacrifices in time and energy. But watching Elena and Emily chat amicably on the construction site, seeing her father find new life in teaching, and feeling James's steady support at her side, Samantha believed they were, at last, weaving their once separate worlds into a shared tapestry of hope and renewal. A year to the day after the Lakeside Hotel fire, Samantha found herself standing outside the newly refurbished facade. A modest ceremony had been arranged to honor the efforts of the local fire department, the construction crews, and the many volunteers who had contributed to the revival of the historic site. Unlike the frantic chaos of 12 months ago, this evening was calm, the building's fresh coat of paint gleaming under string lights. A small stage stood where the entrance once showcased blackened doors. Now those doors had been replaced by glass panels etched with the Lakeside Community Foundation's logo, a stylized lake ripple merging into the city skyline. Samantha waited off to the side, scanning the gathered crowd. Pilsen residents, her father looking on from a chair, James and Emily conferring near a group of reporters. Lisa Chen waved from near the front row, phone raised to capture the moment. Thomas Wu, the longtime hotel maintenance man, took the microphone first, voice trembling with emotion. "When I first stepped foot in this building again, I remembered the night we almost lost everything, but here we stand, stronger than before. Thank you, all of you, for believing." A round of applause rose as each firefighter who responded that fateful night was invited to the stage. They received certificates of appreciation and heartfelt claps on the back. Samantha felt her eyes fill with tears as she recognized a few faces from her own rescue. Although the events of that night still blurred in her memory, a mix of heat, smoke, and sheer willpower. Finally, she was called to speak. Her heart pounded. She approached the microphone, glancing briefly at James, who offered an encouraging nod. "1 year ago," she began, voice clear despite her nerves, "we stood in the ashes of what had been a cherished hotel, uncertain whether it could be salvaged. But we discovered that sometimes the greatest opportunities for growth arise from the darkest tragedies." She paused, letting her words settle over the crowd. "I carry scars from that fire, literally, on my arms and back. At first, I resented them as reminders of pain. But over time, I realized they're also symbols of survival, of choosing hope even in the face of devastation." An echo of understanding passed through the audience, many remembering how she dashed into the flames to save a man most of them hadn't known. Samantha smiled in James's direction, recalling that unconscious figure trapped under debris. So much had changed. She felt a surge of gratitude that he'd become not just a friend, but a partner in rebuilding lives, including their own. "My hope," she continued, "is that this foundation will inspire everyone to see the invisible heroes around us. Those who clean the rooms, fix the wiring, make the coffee, and keep our communities running every day without thanks. Because what truly rescues us isn't just money or power, it's the compassion and courage we show one another." She concluded to a standing ovation, her cheeks burning with emotion. Climbing down the short steps from the stage, she took James's hand. He gave it a gentle squeeze, pride shining in his eyes. They stood together as the light surrounding the renovated entrance flicked on, revealing gleaming windows behind which a new community center awaited its grand opening. Later that night, Robert, hunched but smiling, mingled with the firefighters, thanking them for their valor. Elena introduced Emily to a local pastor who hoped to organize after-school programs. Lisa chatted with old hotel staff now employed by the foundation in various roles. The entire scene hummed with promise, a far cry from the smoldering ruin that once filled them with dread. As the crowd gradually dispersed, Samantha found a quiet corner with James. A gentle wind ruffled her hair, now worn loose instead of pinned in its old, severe bun. She rested her head against his shoulder, eyes tracing the outline of the building that nearly claimed both their lives. "You were right," he said softly, kissing the top of her head. "True heroism happens in the everyday choices we make." She smiled, blinking back tears. "Yes, it does. And I'm learning that healing isn't about erasing scars, but finding meaning in them." Bathed in the warm glow of newly installed lights, they stood amidst a gathering of ordinary people who had done something extraordinary. They'd brought a beloved cornerstone of Pilsen back from near destruction, forging bonds that promised to outlast even the sturdiest brick or steel beam. Exactly 1 year after the Lakeside Community Foundation's grand reopening, Samantha found herself gazing up at a glittering night sky by the edge of Lake Michigan. A soft breeze carried the scent of water, and the city lights shimmered on the horizon. In place of the old hotel, a graceful new entrance now stood, its archway lit by subtle lanterns. Tonight, however, it was transformed into something far more intimate, a wedding venue. Rows of simple wooden chairs lined a small lawn overlooking the lake, with guests chatting excitedly. Samantha could hardly believe this day had arrived. She'd never pictured herself as a bride again, certainly not after her painful divorce. Yet here she stood, wearing an elegant white dress borrowed from a local boutique that supported the foundation's programs. The lace sleeves gently grazed her scarred forearms, a quiet tribute to the journey she'd taken. Elena helped straighten Samantha's veil, eyes shining. "You look stunning, sweet girl," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "And just think, this is where everything began, and began again." Nearby, Robert, looking dapper in a new suit, cleared his throat, summoning every bit of vigor his heart condition allowed. He was set to walk Samantha down the makeshift aisle. She slipped her arm through his, reflecting on the years of worry and struggle. Now he seemed almost rejuvenated, fueled by pride and the love he'd witnessed blossoming between his daughter and James. At the far end of the lawn, James waited in a tailored charcoal tuxedo, blue eyes bright with anticipation. A discreet scar still marked his temple where the falling beam had struck him that night of the fire. Now, it served as a permanent reminder of the life he almost lost, and the life he'd since embraced. Soft music cued from hidden speakers, and the crowd settled into hush. Samantha and Robert began their procession. With each slow step, she saw the faces of the people who had become dear to her. Lisa Chen dabbing away happy tears, Thomas Wu grinning ear to ear, Emily Bennett standing confidently beside her brother, and so many Pilsen residents who had found renewed hope through the foundation. When they reached James, Robert gently placed Samantha's hand in his. The officiant, a retired judge who volunteered at the center's legal aid clinic, smiled warmly, beginning the ceremony with a reflection on unity and perseverance. The hush of the audience was interrupted only by the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. Samantha felt her heart thud in her chest as she gazed into James's eyes. Memories flashed, walking the corridors of the hotel with cleaning supplies, the smell of smoke filling her lungs, waking in the hospital to find him by her bedside, the revelations of his corporate role, their fights and reconciliations, and finally the triumph of bringing new life to Pilsen. Every scar, every setback had led them to this moment. They exchanged vows that were deeply personal. James spoke of redemption and gratitude. "You showed me compassion when I was unconscious to the world, and then again when I was equally oblivious to the consequences of my actions. I promise to stand by you as we continue to build something meaningful, not just in these walls, but in our lives." Samantha's voice trembled with tears as she responded, "You taught me that it's possible to rebuild, even when the damage seems too great. Together, we've learned that true partnership means more than sharing joy. It means facing challenges head-on and never giving up on each other." When they placed simple gold rings on each other's fingers, applause broke out. Several onlookers teared up. Eleanor openly wept, Robert clapped slowly but enthusiastically, and Emily's face glowed with rare vulnerability. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and James leaned in, cupping Samantha's face gently before kissing her. The crowd erupted into cheers as fireworks arced overhead, painting the sky with bursts of color. Afterwards, they all gathered on the newly completed lakeside patio for a small reception. The building's interior had been transformed, rooms for community education, art exhibits, and local gatherings. But tonight, it hosted a celebration of love. Lanterns bobbed in the breeze, and guests enjoyed music from a local band playing soft jazz. Samantha and James slipped away from the crowd to stand by the water's edge, the breeze carrying the sound of distant laughter. He wrapped his arm around her waist, and she leaned into him, letting the events of the evening wash over her. Overhead, the stars glittered, as if bearing witness to their resilience. She traced a finger along the faint scar on James's temple, smiling at him through tears of happiness. He pressed his forehead to hers, voice low and tender. "From the flames to this moment, I'd go through every trial again if it meant finding you." Samantha closed her eyes, heart full. "Me too," she whispered, lifting her face to the starlight and to a future bright with promise, knowing that true heroism, true love, resides in the daily choices to stand by each other, even when the odds seem overwhelming. And as they gazed across the water, hand in hand, they both felt certain that at last they had found a home in each other's hearts that no flames could ever destroy. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.